Hello everyone, I am Tacet, and today I'm going to be going over the Gems of War event of The Eagle Has Landed, in which the Harpy Eagle is added to the game. So, let's get into that. As far as his arcane, it is a green-blue, and there is a ridiculously insane amount of things that you would use green-blue on. Earlier on in the game, you put it into Apothecary, the Harpy Eagle itself, Gluttony, and Trant. And later on in the game, you have a wide range of options, such as Web Spinner, Tapon, Mercy, Queen Jezebel, Christinex, King Avalarn, Hindla Frostcrown, and Glitterclaw, among probably a few others, and of course all the mythics. But yeah, there's definitely a lot to use this on. Could potentially be one that's good to stock up on. They are 300 glory each though, so it's not an epic where you can get them 200 glory each. But you're probably going to need a lot of copies of this troop anyways, as it is pretty decent, at least from an early to mid-game perspective. Later in the game, it's not really going to be able to be used for much, but it has a lot of things going for it, because every single thing it has is great, for the most part, at least from a earlier on in the game perspective. It has a destroy a row, or destroy a column, I mean, which will end up vertically destroying all those manas there, and you would end up accumulating any that you end up destroying. Other than that, it ends up doing a bunch of damage to the last enemy. What's nice about this from a earlier on in the game perspective is it does have a boost ratio. You're normally going to be able to hit around 3 yellows with that, so it's about 12 additional damage. So that's a nice little chunk of damage that you'll be able to hit with it. But the main thing that ends up doing is it is a 75% mana start troop with an 11 mana cost that will end up having the capability to pull the last enemy all the way to the front. So a really cheap, quick option that not only does damage, but will allow you to move the opposing team. So one of the better options to be doing this with earlier on in the game. Most of the cheaper options that we previously had, the biggest issue with them is they wouldn't really have a damage attached to them, or they wouldn't really be able to go quick. They normally wouldn't have one or the other, whereas this can easily do both of those things while not being attached to a hero class like that of Rope Dart. So it definitely has a lot of potential in that regard. It also has 3 insanely good traits. There is one other troop that also has this, and oddly enough, it is also green-blue. However, this one, due to the utility that it has of being able to move the opposing team, I would say overall is better than the other troop that has it. I had to forget its name off the top of my head, but this is the replacement basically for it. It has perpetually 2 times extra skull damage as long as the enemy can be 100 mark. Similar to how Web Spinner always does 3 times damage, this thing will always do 2 times damage as long as they can be have Hunter's Mark on them, because the Hunter's Mark takes effect prior to the damage being calculated. So your whatever your skull value is, assuming that's the one doing it, will be able to do twice the damage. And even if it's not the one doing it, as long as it gets the hit off and it still lives and it dies, then the next troop in line can, of course, still do 2 times damage to it as long as the Hunter's Mark is still there. It has 20% skull dodge, so again, you can use this in first slot. It has 2 really good first slot traits. And it has almost a full mana start. Not exactly empowered. If it was empowered, this thing would actually have a lot of purposes. Unfortunately, it is not. It has a 75% mana start, which makes it a little bit slower, but still, overall, really nice to see. And definitely a great early to mid-game option. Next up, we have tributes, because we can't not take tributes. There we go, 11 gems. Anyways, next thing on our list of things, of course, just our normal weekly event stuff. We have 10% to Suncrest and 10% to all Strix. This is almost the entirety of the Suncrest Kingdom, which is really good because we have a raid week this week. You do get 40 extra souls every single time you use this bird in PvP. Given that you can probably use this in PvP early and mid-game without actually losing any time, it might be actually worth doing this. However, later in the game, it is definitely not worth it, as there's no team you would viably put it in, and 40 souls, of course, is still a relatively small reward compared to that of 5 glory and the gold option. So of the 3, it's definitely the worst of them, so you're still not really going to be able to get much of a bonus out of it, and one that you'd most likely just want to ignore for actual soul farming, like Arena, Dragon Soul teams, Fair Shroud teams, and the such. As far as event keys this week, they are somewhat okay to go for. You definitely, if you are earlier on in the game, you definitely want to go until you at least have Sunbird as an option. Pretty much every single thing you see right here is what the event key drop table is, with the only exception being Doom of Light is not there, and the 4 faction troops that came in the most recent faction are also not there, that being Bladewing, Harpy, Harpy Mage, and Queen Zaejin. But other than those 4 and the Doom, all the other ones that are here are in the drop table. So Sunbird, obviously, if you don't have any copies of him, or if you don't have it Mythic yet, it could be viable to use event keys. This is probably one of the few troops in the entire game where I would say spending event keys to get it to Mythic that's below a Epic or lower is actually worth it, because you use Sunbird for a quick explore. It can be used as a tank since it constantly revives every single time you cast it. And is overall just an amazing troop. Probably top 10 overall in the entire game, even though it's only a ultra rare. It's just used for a lot of stuff. Mostly quick explore, but there's a lot of utilities that you can end up using it for, between the fact that it constantly gains red firestorm, constantly can be used as tank, and is a relatively decent damage source, at least relative to its mana cost. The only thing it's really missing is no board control on it, unfortunately. It covers all the other grounds pretty well. But other than that, the legends from this kingdom, nothing really too special, except for maybe Taloka. It's kind of like a Rowan in a way, where it requires a storm. It's very similar to Sunbird and Rowan. It does overall do slightly less damage, however, it's used for extra turn spam, since it can keep constantly doing 10 damage every single extra turn, which can definitely stack up. And unlike things like Kraken, where it technically loses damage as enemies die, this will do the full amount of damage even if enemies die. Since it'll always be doing 10 to a single one, rather than a bunch of AoE to the entire enemy team at once. So really good troop in that. Mythic is pretty lackluster though. So again, you'd mainly only want to use event keys up to getting a Taloka copy or two, or until you basically get your Sunbird Mythic if you want to go all out with it. But other than that, there really isn't much of a need to use event keys this week, and it's a decent week to go and skip it. Next up, we have our course of raids. Raids this week is somewhat okay. We end up having a Suncrest requirement as far as what we can use. Unfortunately, the hero class from Suncrest/Strix is not coming into the game yet. It's coming in about a month and a half, and obviously that doesn't do us any good right now. So we do not have a hero class for this, which is a little bit unfortunate. But that is kind of noteworthy in the fact that this weapon right here is Suncrest attached, ends up creating yellow and purple, the purple being really relevant. It's like all the other ones that end up doing it based on a certain typing. But of course, similar to Slicer, this one creates color into itself, which potentially could be very, very, very ridiculously strong. And we are getting a hero class for this, 2 hero classes from now, not the next hero class, but the following one, unless they change the schedule, will end up being a Suncrest hero class. So this weapon is definitely one that you'll want to go and obtain, as it could potentially be very, very broken in about a month and a half from now. Because you'll be able to feed into its color, and you'll be able to go all 4 times, which is something that no weapon can currently do. None of them feed into themselves while also being able to do 4 times, as Stone Slicer is for Construct, and there is currently no Construct hero class. So it'll be the first one, if I'm not mistaken, unless there's another one that's coming in between then off of one of the events, but I don't believe there is. But anyways, yeah, has a lot of potential. Yellow, a lot of Strixes end up using. Purple, not so much, but of course you're mainly feeding purple back into your self for the most part. The actual raid troop this week is pretty lackluster. It's pretty much just a standard raid troop. His special gimmick is if there's a storm, he ends up blessing itself. Very, very, very kind of pointless effect. Bless will not protect you against the instant kill of Zugoff, and there's almost like no stats effects this week, so that's almost going to do nothing as far as its benefit that's going to give. So you're pretty much just using this for its standard extra damage that it does against raid troops, which is still good in itself, but overall pretty lackluster. So there are 2 teams. One of them I'll just be doing right now. The other one will show in the other little thingy. But basically I'm just going with use the plumbed staff into a bunch of other options. That's probably one of the easiest ways to do it, especially if you're just doing it up to getting it done and you're not trying to go for leaderboards or anything. Of course, some other options that end up existing that end up working out pretty good, or Mang, Trickster Shot, stuff like that if you need to use it for these events. But basically, we're just going to kill all of these with the damage off of our weapon while using the mana that we end up getting off of extra turns and just from the yellow that it creates to constantly kill out the raid boss with the raid killing troop. And that's about all we'll need to do. I'm just using Titan so we can constantly tank with it if we need. Talokas will be doing 20 damage every single extra turn we do, because we have 2 of them, and of course each do 10 damage, so we can easily chip them down that way by constantly spamming out the weapon. We did unfortunately miss the extra turn right at the beginning, which made it so we are running a little bit slower here. And of course we'll be able to throw those down. Oh, and since we didn't have the storm, you can end up using a, if you want to, a Sunspear, and try putting a little bit more red into the game, or onto your team, so that you can get the Talokas constantly having a storm. You do need to be casting that weapon in order to keep getting Light Storm, to have any storm in play. Otherwise your Talokas will not do their triple damage that they have. So unfortunately we got a little bit of a bad loop at the beginning there. But ideally you want to get its Light Storm that it has. It has a few benefits: gain some life, gain some magic. Come on, roll into the next one. There we go. And it does the 5 scatter, and of course the main thing that's relevant on its very last perk, it gains Light Storm, and that you need for all of your boost ratio. You need it for that bless, but more importantly, you need it for Taloka's triple damage based on Storm. A lot of things within this kingdom are around the premise that you need a Storm in order to do some kind of additional benefit. Almost every single thing from this faction ends up having that, like Phoenicia needing Red Storm, quite a few of them just needing any storm, and other similar things to that. So do be mindful of that with any of the troops you have, as almost everything from that kingdom is based around that premise. Anyways, as far as our events this week, we have Dark Pits tomorrow on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we have not that pet. It'll be Flutter. That is the yellow hero mastery pet. On Thursday, we're going to be having Sunspear, which I've actually been leveling, so it's kind of convenient that's coming in. And on next Friday, we're going to be getting a brand new faction. It's going to be a bunch of mushrooms for the Zaejin, and that will bring Zaejin to 10 plus stars, since it already has the Thief Hero class. Where is Zaejin? Right over there. Yeah, I believe it reaches 12 or 13 stars this Friday, so you'll be able to go and end up getting that upgraded with the new faction. Most of your troops are pretty useless from the new faction. However, we are getting basically a new Queen Grapple Pot. It doesn't have as much defense capability, but it'll have higher damage than her while doing full AoE extra turn. So very similar to her ability. However, the traits will be slightly different, and overall, the new option is actually going to be better than Queen Grapple Pot, even though you can use them both together in Goblin teams. So we'll see exactly how that pans out. The 3 mushrooms that are coming are pretty useless, though. Really only the legend from that faction is actually going to be usable. As far as Soul Forge, we have something that's worth crafting this week. That is Tina 9000. I consider this personally one of the top few troops in the entire game right now. It's not necessarily the first thing you would craft, though. This is more of like a 4th or a 5th craft. You can get it a little bit earlier if you want, but even though it's insanely good, I wouldn't get it as your very, very first one. But it has quite a few options. It's pretty good in the lower to mid-range of delves. Has one of the highest true damage outputs in the entire game. It's very, very inconsistent, which is one of the main reasons you don't necessarily want to craft this as one of your first ones, just because its consistency is very, very, very low. Because not only is its targets that it hits random, it's also doing a random amount of damage. However, it does overall get a really high amount of true damage down. It can easily get a kill off in the context of PvP, and when you're up against similar stat troops. You can normally end up getting a kill off every single cast that you do. If 2 hits end up hitting the same thing, it almost guaranteed kill when you're up against similar related stats, and ends up getting a really high armor gain. And why armor gain normally isn't too relevant, it is currently the best 50% spell reduction troop in the entire game, which is where a good majority of its value comes from. And it has an armor gain into a 50% spell reduction. There are other troops that have this too, like the most recent Mythic. However, this thing's actually useful because of its very high damage output. Not only is its ability a very high damage output, but you normally use a Tina around your second slot, and then after your first slot dies, you can do 50% of your armor as skull damage, and given that you likely would have cast the ability about once or twice, you will very easily have over 100 armor at that point, which would be over 50 additional skull damage per poke. So you'll be able to get a lot of damage out with not only your ability with true damage, but also your skulls with physical damage. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any true damage on skull. It doesn't have like that 50% piercing thing, but still overall, you'll be able to one-shot with your ability. Will also almost be able to one-shot, if not one-shot, with your skull. So it has a lot of things going for it. It's also pretty good against Yagwe, Queen of Tanya, and other similar teams that are really dependent on doing a lot of spell reduction or spell damage, specifically physical spell damage, as it has armor to mitigate that damage, as well as the 50% reduction to mitigate it even further, which is a really good combination against physical casting teams like AoE teams, things that just concentrate a lot of spell reduction while doing it all with physical. But that's the main thing that you would craft. Queen Isabel is technically somewhat worth it. It's occasionally used on Guild Wars and stuff. I personally don't use it much, but its main gimmick is it gives +1 to all the hero masteries. So that's pretty relevant since you can use that for additional mana accumulation. Though, of course, there's things like Possessed Kings and stuff that tend to be a little bit better than it overall and used in more options. Other than that, we have a few things that are exclusive as far as that you can craft this week if you haven't ended up getting them in the pass. I believe there are 2, and that is Light Sword, which is 100% pointless. However, you would just get it for collection purposes. And the other one being the Nimbus Bow. Nimbus Bow might be somewhat useful this week. It is kind of like the most recent weapon that was just added, the Plum Staff. But instead of boosting based on Suncrest, it is boosted based on Strix, which is almost the exact same thing, given that almost the entire kingdom is of that typing. There are a few less Strix options. However, the coloration of this is blue and yellow rather than purple and yellow, so it might be a little bit more usable in some situations. Unfortunately, this weapon does not feed mana back into itself. So overall, Plum Staff would probably be the better option. But still, for completion purposes, you're probably going to want to pick this up. And who knows, this thing might still be useful when the hero class ends up coming out, the Strix Suncrest hero class, in a month and a half. But those are the only 2: the Nimbus Bow and the Light Sword, and the Plum Staff you can just get off of spending gems on the event. I believe it's only 250 gems, though if you really want to, if you don't want to spend the gems, you can of course also craft that in SoulForge, and it's 50% cheaper than if you were to do it at a later time. And that's everything for SoulForge, so let's just get into a couple of teams real quick, just for all of the weekly stuff that we're going to be having going on this week. So let's go and show off these. We'll start from, I guess, the top for now. So on Thursday, we're going to be having the Sunspear Class events. There are a few things that you can run for this. I'll personally be running Dawnbringer with a bunch of yellow troops behind it. We are just using a Ubestead here to gain us a bunch of additional stats there, as well as just the fact that he counts as a yellow. We'll have the half main just to be able to do a little bit of damage plus yellow. Rashka here, damage plus yellow while being a slightly different color. And the whole point, of course, is just to spam Dawnbringer's yellow boost ratio and constantly getting hits with that. And just being able to win out off of Dawnbringer's pure damage. And just quick killing with that. Of course, if you want to go a little bit further, you might want to use more of a Mang-like option. Mang and Zaejin is probably just going to be the entirety of your team. You can, of course, put Ubesteads in there. I just showed it with this just to be a little bit cheaper for when you copy and paste it. But, of course, if you have it, you can just literally go Mang, Sakima, double Ubestead. That's probably going to be your best option if you want to quick kill these things. There's not really any summon, if I'm not mistaken, from the kingdom, so you're just going to have to go with pure damage and just make sure you use Titan or something to make sure that you don't die with all of your barriers. And just kill it with Sakima's Skull Spam. On Tuesday, we're going to be having Dark Pits event. Dark Pits is green-brown restriction. Of course, with this, you will be able to go and get away with Mountain Crusher Apothecary with double Gargoyle. And that also means you'd still be able to get away with putting things like Ketris's there. You can get away with putting Tina's there and other similar things. But of course, this is one of the cheaper options that you can end up running for it for the lower levels, just to be able to get the event completed. Other than that, we have the Mang raid team, the other raid team that I was kind of mentioning. You can also use Trickster Shot or the Nimbus Bow here if you don't want to run down specifically with Mang. And here we just end up using the Harpy Mage in order to constantly gain our storms, and for mana accumulation, ends up doing Brown Storm. This one's a little bit safer than the other options because we have Queen Zaejin here, which will be a 35% chance that we can keep resummoning. Of course, the Zugoff will instantly kill whatever it touches, even if you have barrier. So you might potentially lose some troops, and you will be able to resummon into those using the 35% chance per extra turn off of Queen Zaejin. And if Queen Zaejin accidentally dies, you still technically have a summon option. There's a 25% chance that you summon a Blade Wing, which has a 20% kill if there's a storm. So every single time you get a kill, you will be able to have a slate replacement option. Of course, that's not as good as Zachi's thing, but at least it's something in case Zachi does come down. So you have two summoners potentially. You obviously still have the raid troop in order to do the high raid damage against the boss. You just throw Mang down, then you throw a Pavis Dawnwind at it at the raid troop. You use your Harpy for your mana accumulation, and after you've done your Mang, you use Queen Zaejin occasionally for the little bit of damage, while also getting some explosions. It's set up very similarly to that of a Infernus. It's not as good as Infernus, but in this context, it'll work as pretty much the exact same thing, assuming that you have a Storm active, which you should be able to if you're using Titan. You start with Brown Storm, and you'll constantly be able to keep doing Brown Storms by casting Harpy Mage every single time, and accumulating mana that way. Plus, she has a 75% mana start, so you'll really easily be able to get that rolling again, and just constantly keep repeating it. And of course, you can run with Trickster Shot or something similar if you want to run with that instead. And lastly, the one I actually want to show is early game to mid game Harpy Eagle. Taloka, or all of this, you can actually get in the event key drop table this week. Taloka might be slightly harder. However, you can end up just replacing that out with pretty much any yellow damage source. Even something like Ranger in early game would probably get the job done. But if you have Taloka, put a Taloka there. And basic premise of this is we're going to be running with the new weapon. Of course, we don't have the hero class for this yet. Another month and a half until it does, in which case you would use that hero class. Right now, we're just using Necromancer, oddly enough, because it happens to gain even more souls on top of the 40 souls we're gaining on that. But also, also because it has a +1 purple and ends up getting stealthy. And with that +1 purple, we'll be able to easily feed our weapon up a little bit better. But we'll go for that for now. Go grab herself. Also, did I not set it to his half mana start? I know it has it. Did I forget to actually set it to it? That's a fail. Might have set it for one of the other perks. It's not too big a deal, though. We won't really end up needing it specifically to kill out this battle. Of course, it would be beneficial in order to get our mana flowing. But we'll go with that. We'll go and take ourselves. I'm actually not going to take those purples because we have a higher chance if we leave it there to try to get an extra turn. Unfortunately, we do end up missing the extra turn. Don't get it on the cascade or anything there. Luckily, we have the board populated, so we should be able to get it down here. And yes, we do end up getting that. Get her a little bit of damage off on him every single time we do extra turn. Toloka will be able to apply that 10 damage into there. So we'll go and poke all of those just to keep chipping it down. We'll go and let's see, what can we do here? I guess we go for the skull at this point. I'm not going to really try for a yellow off the sky. We do have Storm, though. So that actually is a pretty good chance, but I'm going to pass up on the skull if I don't. Unfortunately, we did get stuns there, which makes it so it can't end up using its 2x skull damage. However, we can still go move his hero to front line, even though he has a bless on it. That is not going to stop the movement that we have. So we will go and get that on him just to move his hero up, so that we can actually go and kill it. Doesn't matter where we end up doing this for the most part, though we do want to try hitting a decent amount of yellow. So we'll try there, try to yellow storm yellow that. Didn't end up getting it, but of course that moves the hero to front. He ends up dropping his bless, and now we should be able to just kill it. Unfortunately, no skull here. I don't think we'll have enough damage then. It does look like he's going to get a little bit of lifesteal in there, which is not ideal. I don't think we have any extra turn chance that we could really utilize off the board. I guess we maybe try taking that purple and have a skull chance there. Probably going to be one of our only real ways, though. It's probably just going to drop a yellow, given that we have a yellow storm. Nope, didn't drop us of anything of use. But let's go and kill that hero, because that thing is just going to keep getting more and more life. Luckily, we dragged it right to front slot with the troop. We should be able to kill it here. We'll go for this, hopefully be able to get our extra turn. Does end up missing the extra turn again. That's one of the biggest issues with not having 4 of them on your team, which we'll be able to have very soon into the future. But not having 4 of them does end up dropping the amount of gem spawn that you actually end up getting from the weapon. Makes it a little bit weaker there. Looks like we are going to be losing it. No! Come back, Griffin! But luckily, we'll still be able to spam this weapon. Of course, as we lose troops, it does end up losing some of its boost ratio that it has. But it should still have a high enough boost ratio to deal with everything that we have left here. Let's see, we'll just grab that. And of course, this is geared towards early game and mid game. This is not something you should be running later in the game. Case in point, this battle right here. It's just because the Griffin effect. If you're going to bother with an effect like that, you might as well just run Rope Dart or Web Spinner, both of which are superior options relative to the troop. Rope Dart in that it can move absolutely any of them. It has a very similar start, plus you could use it with hero and have all the perks on it. And Web Spinner because it has the triple damage on it. And it also has a slightly better ability that actually has a loop ability attached to it. But anyways, I believe that is everything for this event. If you still have any other questions about this weekly event, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a wonderful week. Goodbye, everyone!